cool. So let's move on. Let's hear back from your Learning Circle champions and from our very own super champion, Jay Naidoo. So will you please welcome to the stage Jay Naidoo, Paulus Verschuren, Hans Herron, Jamie Cooper-Hone, Tom Arnold, Lord Ewan Cameron and Decima Williams. Welcome all.
Thanks very much and good afternoon. The last mile. The questions that were asked were pretty misleading. So when you're asked, where are you from? Actually, you all come from Africa. That was the cradle of humanity. So why don't you answer the question correctly? But I was sitting next to Nora, and she's like a very disruptive influence in my life. So we voted to be someone else. So thanks very much, and it's great to be back here and together with the champions, the super champions. And so I am going to call on them immediately to give their 1-minute interventions. 1 minute? Yes. Okay, 1 minute, 10 seconds. Starting with Tom.
Okay, Jay, thanks. Well, my understanding of our group was that to look at the local and national dimension in achieving economic and social and environmental development, and how also as a subset of that, how can positive developments be implemented to scale. We felt that there were certain basic principles that had to operate in answering this question. The first one was, a people-centered governance. A sense of real mutual accountability between the different parts of the system, and obviously hopefully underpinned by a sense of justice. As regards the how, the issue of decentralization, which is happening in many countries. In some countries it's not happening very effectively, but it's happening, and trying to make decentralization work as well as possible a key issue. On institutions, there are different types of institutions along the chain from national to local, whether it be government, community-based organizations, farmers' associations. I think there needs to be a very clear recognition that institutions need time to develop and need resources to develop, and particularly need the political space to develop. So that level of political culture and tolerance for institutional diversity is of major importance. And then as regards how change actually happens, change will happen most effectively when there is a clear benefit from change to the individual. And so we had some very interesting examples. We had the biogas system in Nepal, where this new system allowed, just better, healthier environments in the home. Very interesting examples of the Keyhole Gardens in Lesotho, where, again, a basic idea tested at community level, developed by research, and has the institutions of the local extension services to spread out and develop. And then finally, the source of great possibility, particularly right through East Africa, the mobile phone, and how all the potential that gives rise to.
Thank you, Tom. Paulus.
Thank you, Jay. I know the three aspects coming out of the discussion on Keyhole Gardens. It works. You can say job is done. Why is it so? First of all, it's local solutions to local problems. That should always be the starting point here. Homegrown ideas, locally owned. It's simple, practical, and scalable. That's what we need to look for. Why does it work? Because people are being put central here to the solution. They know what they need, and they know what they want. We need to help them actually facilitate that. That is key here. So it serves three purposes. It's good for the family, it's good for health, and it's good for the environment. So you see here, homegrown ideas is actually a very good, viable business plan they have developed themselves. Very, very important in here. A key point to remark here is make sure farmers are business people, but involve the private sector early on to actually finalize or optimize the whole value chain. It is key. And my second observation I want to make here is I see that in the whole development community, it's a pretty crowded house all over the place. I mean, I'm not sure as to who is doing what and how and where here, and should we reorganize ourselves? And should you look to develop, let's say, a unique selling point is to really be really good in? That's maybe an area where we need to develop to secure we have a return on investment which makes sense, because at the end of the day, it's about creating value for people, for society, and for the environment.
Thank you, Paulus. Decima, my dear co-conspirator.
We're going to make the revolution
Starting here.
in development.
Yes, and in the mind.
And in the mind. So we had a wonderful group. We had four key findings. First, it's affirmation. We believe that local people know much more than they're given credit for. And what they know can influence results. We believe that local people do not have all the answers. The private sector, research institutions are also key allies. But the contribution of local people must be given greater prominence. And in that regard, we believe that women matter. Women have special needs, but they have tremendous abilities. On change, we feel that we need to change our vision of development, our actions, and our relationships related to development. We must acknowledge, again, the power and the strength of people. We need the bottom and the top. We need governments who acknowledge people at the center, and therefore bring farmers, bring pastoralists, and bring fisherfolk, and of course women among them, to the international table. We had a third area we looked at, which is politics. We must acknowledge that politics are always present, but people must control politics to ensure that it works for them. Critical evidence and data, for example, must serve people and to have their continued ownership so that people can hold governments accountable. At this meeting, local people can organize to influence Ireland, who then can influence the European Union, who then can influence the post-2015 development agenda on hunger, nutrition, and climate change. And in that sense, we need a single goal and on hunger and nutrition in the post-2015. And lastly, and importantly, we have to do things in new ways. Communities must be at the center of knowledge and action. If cows don't work, use camels. If maize don't work, use peanuts. Isolated action on nutrition must be combined with action on climate change, health, food security, and the like. In other words, we must do things differently if we want new and different results.
Thank you. Jamie, with your hands.
Sure. So we had a great discussion about why a joined up process and what were we trying to achieve and what gets us there. So in terms of a joined up process, we're looking for, our belief is that we will have better ultimate success if we can align in an inclusive vision, and if we have a process that gets us to all know our mutual commitments or respective commitments, and we're all pushing together. And there were two key lessons and then two recommendations that came out of it. In terms of the lessons, this is not, you get into a room and everybody states their position. It's a complex, long-term commitment if you're going to work toward those outcomes. It needs to be facilitated. You need good evidence and science so that the decisions are based on something smart, and you need to put time into this, was the first lesson. And the second was that you're going to start with fragmentation. These issues start with legitimate competing priorities. And that part of the process is to get to harmonization, or a key part of the success is to get to harmonization. But you will start with the fragmentation. In terms of recommendations, there was one overarching theme, which was about the need to push the dialogue, to very proactively do that beyond the elite. And there were lots and lots of ideas about how that can happen. So there was an example in Ecuador where they have a legal framework that says we won't fund anything unless it came up through a participatory process that included these types of stakeholders. We need that evidence to be good. Governments making sure that if they're going to sponsor R&D budgets, that they are practical research that apply to the decisions we're going to have to make, that we're smarter about what we invest in, that we actively seek and get super champions who can communicate and resonate very broadly with the population, and that we find ways for people to present their views back up. And then that we frame the narrative around something that resonates with people. So the example that we had today was, don't talk about adaptation. Most people don't identify and resonate with that. They identify and resonate with food, and that's a discussion we can all have. The second recommendation was, you need to plan the financing, the resources, proportionate to the scope of the problem. If we're talking about climate change or we're talking about food security, this is a long-term problem. It's a multi-stakeholder conversation. It needs to be invested in properly if we're going to get back to the success that we talked about at the beginning.
Thank you, Jamie. Hans?
Thank you, Jay. So we, from our learning circle, so we were dealing with the local to national. So scaling up from local to national level is possible, as we have seen. It's demonstrated convincingly, or very convincingly actually, in the Ethiopian case study on basically rehabilitating a whole region, in particular the soil fertility. From our learning circle, well, we would like to convey that the sense of urgency is missing. This is the one thing I think that came out, that we need to move from the discussion phase to take real actions at all levels to deal with the imminent challenges of hunger, nutrition, and climate justice. And how are we going to do that? So we selected 3 areas, and I can see there's quite a convergence, which I'm going to say, which has been said before, depending, no matter how you look at things, I think we're going in the same direction. So the first point was to rebuilding or strengthening institutions, and here we talk about the local and regional governments. And as many countries decentralize, I think this is very important. The learning and extension institutions, again, they have to be rebuilt and adapted to the new questions. They cannot just continue on the same track. That's a very important point. And also the farmer and consumer organizations, we need to be really integral part, I think, of all this strengthening of organizations for them to work together at an equal level. So they have to be, again, so we need to do this at all levels and to equip them with human, natural, and financial resources to handle the challenges, again, of hunger, nutrition, and climate injustice. So again, nothing will happen unless I think these institutions are endowed with the proper means. Number 2, ensuring that the policies are decided in a multi-stakeholder process. There's a lot of talk about it. You go look in the implementation, is a very different story. I think that's so we really emphasize this point. There's also a need to ensure community-driven implementation with feedbacks for refinement of policies and accountability of all actors. There has to be a systemic built-in system of policy implementation back to policy and continuity, so that we go into a positive spiral. This feedback must be based on evidence from the field, and so continuing monitoring and evaluation of the process is essential. And the last point, the complexity of the issues we deal with demand a systemic, integrated, and coordinated approach among the stakeholders and a long-term commitment from government and the development partners. You cannot deal with complex long-term issues with short-term commitments. So again, a very strong point we made there. So it is necessary to give time to build community trust and establish long-term goals to ensure that the underlying causes are addressed. And again, so you have to spend more time in looking at the underlying causes and basically stop treating symptoms, because we'll never be finished. So again, it has to be trust. People have to discuss and look really at the cause of the problem. And that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Evan?
Thank you very much. This is the introduction from the Yellow Group. Yellow by nomination, brave by nature, I may say. It's quite hard to condense. We had a really good discussion. It's really hard to condense everything we said. But we said that we reckon that any conference on nutrition, hunger and climate justice must start with smallholder agriculture. Smallholder agriculture can kickstart the national economy, it can empower women, it can provide funds to educate kids, and it can provide nutrition and health. But in order to do all those things, it needs all departments of government, or presidential leads, as in Malawi, I've just heard, and especially those departments of health and education, to focus on a joined-up agenda. Now, smallholder agriculture has got a lot of problems, but most important of these is the distribution of knowledge and training. And improving that knowledge, this is from the scientific perspective as well as actually the actual extension services, has to start on the ground, in the field, with the women as mothers, farmers and educators, and especially involving the young. However, our most important message is on climate change. It is a matter of justice that industrialized nations should take the climate agenda seriously and commit themselves to mitigate and reduce their emissions. However, even if that happens at all, these changes will take time to take effect. So our crucial message is that it is a matter of both equity and justice that the industrialized world, led by the European Union, should commit greater financial support on a very serious scale to help local communities and others in the developing world to adapt to the major problems they are already encountering from climate change, before too many of them, as in the words of one of our contributors, either get washed away or dried out. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we are under strict instructions on time, so I'm going to throw it open to the audience again, and to take comments about whether there's anything left out of your learning circle that you feel needs to be included in the report back. And maybe a second question that I'd ask you is, did you find any value in this conference? Or was it just nice being in Dublin? And if there has to be a process to a next stage, what would that be? What do you want? So we have a chance for 4 comments from the floor. Please. David?
Thank you very much, everybody. What an exciting conference. I'm David Nabarro from the United Nations. I did hear, when the report backs were being given, quite frequent use of the word must. And what I believe this often means is that in your groups you felt there was an imperative on certain processes or systems to happen in a particular way. I'd like to ask, is there an alternative to must? What happens if the systems or institutions don't change in the way that the learning circles would like them to? What do we do then? And I'd like to reflect on that.
Thank you. Right at the back.
Thanks very much. I have only 2 points. The first one that we discussed is those projects, actually, the program are lasting 2 years, 3 years on the maximum. And what we really need is any programs that we develop should be plugged into the national plan, national governmental plan, to make sure that things will continue. That is one important thing. Another one is also to allow sustainable development is also to build infrastructure at the local level. Those are the 2 points I want to point.
Okay, we got 2 more points, and it has to be a gender balance here. So I'm going to take one at a point.
Hi, I'm Olive Towie from Concern. Ambassador Williams raised the question around a goal for food and nutrition security and the role that Europe could play. And a number of the other comments from the panel echo the conclusion of a consultative process on food security and nutrition, which concluded on the 4th of April in Madrid with a very strong consensus and commitment to a goal for on food and nutrition security. So I guess I'd like that message and that echo to come out very clearly. And in terms of the role that Europe can play, The final pieces of the overall food and nutrition security policy framework are being put in place at the moment, and the Foreign Affairs Council coming up is both going to conclude that policy framework and also set out Europe's position going into September. So I think there's a huge opportunity for Europe to be a super champion on the issue of food and nutrition security. Thank you.
30 seconds here, and then is there another woman out there who, yes, then I'll take you.
Thank you. What do I want out of this conference? Out of this conference, I hope that we are not going to forget that Africa has already started on its program, on the initiative of the CADA process, which is a crossroads for what has been said here. And I think they should be patted on the back and be capacitated to the extent that they embark on the CADA process and make sure that it becomes a reality. Many countries have already signed that compact, and others are in the process of doing that, and I hope we can get there, all of us. Thank you.
At the back.
Yes, I'm Maria Daryl from the Philippines. I work with the National Rural Women Coalition and also a member of the Philippine Movement for Climate Justice. Yesterday in our learning circle, we were thrown off guard by this question that it is about how is it that after so many years of talking about rights, empowerment, and good governance, nothing has changed. Of course, the super champion in us didn't accept the question. It was not quite acceptable because we feel that things have changed somehow, especially for us who have spent half of our lives organizing among women, among farmers and fishers. But I would agree with the question to the extent that there's no systemic change so far. You've mentioned earlier of systemic changes. I'm not so sure if we're on the same page. But if we are, I think systemic change means climate justice. And if we are agreeable to that, that means we should not leave unanswered the questions raised earlier with regard to emission cuts, reparations, climate financing. I think we should not be living Dublin, no matter how nice Dublin is, without being able to answer that question raised earlier.
So I return back to the panel. We really have literally 2 or 3 minutes left. So there have been some very poignant questions asked of you all and of us. So who wants to bail the cat? Paulus?
Yeah, what I learned from the questions is that, and also responding to David, is if we are prepared to listen, David, then things will evolve if we involve the community here. That is a starting point here. The community is at the drawing table. If it doesn't work, it goes back to the drawing table for them to redesign. It's not by others coming in to tell them what to do here. So we need to see is if we listen carefully, we know what the needs and wants are, and we need to help them fulfill that.
Okay, anyone else? Hans? And then Tom?
I'll also go back to what maybe the first question, but also some to touch on the others very quickly. I think that, you see, if we don't do what needs to be done, the communities in certain places won't have much power to move the rest of the world. And I think we have to be careful here that the people who are responsible for a lot of the problems need to take responsibility and start to do what we know needs to be done. Because just for a small community in Africa cannot basically change the way Europe or North America consumes, for example, and continues to produce a lot of CO2, which will impact those communities even more. So I think there has this issue of how do people get together, and I think we need this more mass movement from the bottom up. And I think if there's any indication, just look at history. Read Jared Diamond, and you'll figure exactly, that we don't want to find ourselves in front of the last 3 and asking ourselves, well, are we going to cut it down or leave it there? I think that's the thing. Okay.
Tom?
I don't think there's any such thing as a must in politics. When certain conditions are put in place to make things happen, it's because leadership has come into play, a sense of real urgency and priority, and a number of other conditions, political judgment as well. I think for a lot of these people in this room, they are advocates in some shape or form. I think what we need to take away from this meeting is just a sense of urgency to do really important things about not just climate change, but about nutrition, and how do we work together as effectively as possible to bring that about.
Can I? Yeah, I mean, David, I mean, it's already happening, I think. I mean, there's not a question of must. I mean, local action is already happening. And, you know, yes, you do need a national plan, and somehow you've got to fit in with that, but the national governments have got to look at putting in place the infrastructure or the structures in order to be able to listen to what the local people are actually saying. And if they're not, then the local people have got to say it nevertheless. And they are beginning to take control of their own future, I think. And in my view, in dealing with the lady from the Philippines, empowerment comes with success. And success comes with focus and priority and the urgency that Tom was talking about. And I think if something comes out of this conference which tries to impart that and put that down to all over the world, then that would be a good thing.
I want to make 3 quick points. First of all, I want to endorse our brother's call for Africa's visibility going forward. I think that's enormously important. Africa is at one of its high points, represented by you here, for example, and so I endorse that. Secondly, I want to say that I come from an island, and islands are also on the cutting edge of climate change and other challenges. And we have some of the answers as well as some of the challenges. And lastly, to my brother who's going back to New York, nothing happens if nothing changes. You know, nothing changes, then nothing happens. We must. There is no alternative. And I think that what we heard this morning is a lot of change in Brazil as a result of that model of social democratic governments, caring government, and popular democratic vision and action. That can be a model that Ireland will help us amplify as we plan for the 2015, post-2015.
Thank you. David?
I thought when you said reflect, we had a lot of time to reflect, so I didn't. I do think it's that. I think what we hear is there is a lot of fragmentation, and we start at very different points. And I found at least our learning circle really exciting in that harmony came, and there was a real cohesion of where we want to go. So I have a lot of faith in the process and thought, whether it was questioning what if the process doesn't work or that need to get to the end and institutionalize it, that if we work toward it, it will come.
Well, thank you very much. And, in conclusion, let me just say there's no perfect process because we're not in a laboratory. We're in real life, and real life is a political minefield, particularly down in the trenches. We had a saying in struggle against apartheid, you either organize or you starve. I think that's the key point. I spent a wonderful lunch with a group of fisherwomen and men and herders from Mongolia and farmers from Malawi. So I learned a lot about that. At the end of the day, there has to be urgency. There has to be equity. There has to be justice. There has to be an idea of equal partnerships, that we've had a very patronizing approach to development, a lot in the past. We're recognition today and these last 2 days of indigenous knowledge is a building block of the type of development that is owned by the people rather than given out to people. And so I think we do not need to reinvent the wheel on much of what we have discussed. But the question is making markets work for the poor, the type of data that is relevant to the demands of local communities rather than donors and governments, and a mutual accountability both from the top down and from the bottom up. And so understanding that development is complex, it's a minefield, it's going to be messy and noisy. Let us go forward hoping that we can find each other. Thank you very much. And thank you for the time.
Jay and all the champions.